Job 28. And as we continue our journey through Job, this is a really interesting chapter compared with many of the ones we've looked at. So hopefully we can enjoy our time in a chapter that's very unique to Job, and we'll explain some of that in a minute. So let's pray and then jump into it. Lord, we thank you for Job. We thank you for your word, which we can read and understand. We're grateful that we have a copy of your scripture, in fact, several copies of your scripture in our own language. Not only that, we have it in our own language in a variety of translations, and you've just given us a wealth of opportunity to know you through your word. And pray, Lord, we wouldn't squander that. And so give us clear eyes and open hearts, and we pray your Spirit would do the work to change us tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, Job 28 is a very unique chapter in the book of Job. Again, we understand that this is Job's sort of final speeches before we hear from a young man named Elihu. Then finally we will hear from God, and then the book will wrap up. And this chapter is unique because of the subject matter is so different than any of the other chapters that we've gone through. In fact, the subject matter is so different that there are some ill-informed theologians who think it shouldn't even be in the book of Job, so they take it out, because it doesn't seem to fit, and which I think is silly. I think it's always silly when we look at our Bibles and tear it apart. Job was probably written maybe 1,000 years before Christ. If you take the assumption that it was written down out of the oral tradition, maybe around David and Solomon's time, and then another 2,000 years go by. So have you ever? I don't know. I don't correspond in writing with my wife much anymore, other than in text, I suppose. Of course, when you're dating, you tend to do more of that. When we were dating, there was email. There wasn't texting. There was texting, but it wasn't common. It was a real pain. You had to hit 1-3 times to get to C. Remember those kind of phones? And I'm terrible at the phones we have now, much less those little things. So we would email, and so you could look at any given email. At one paragraph might be discussion of can't wait to see you, yada, romantic stuff. Then the next paragraph might be, I've got this class, because I was at seminary when we were dating. I've got this class, and I'm going to go to work later, and then I've got to call my mom and see what's going on there. And so there'll be some, and then at the end, there might be a different topic, And isn't that normal when you're writing? But people do it in the Bible. They encounter something that's a little bit different, and they can have it in their mind that maybe Job decided to say something a little different this time, which is exactly what he did. Now, there is one thing we should consider that I don't find disruptive at all. I don't know one way or the other, because I'm not a fancy pants scholar somewhere. I am okay with the notion that it could be that this particular chapter was written by the person who was pulling together all of the information about Job. So this happens all the time in Scripture, where, for example, in the book of Deuteronomy, most of that, as we understand, is written by Moses, but Moses dies before the end of the book of Deuteronomy. So either he was really good at writing about what was going to happen, which he could have been, or it could be that that we had people inspired by the Holy Spirit with the authority of the Word of God to record what happened after Moses' death. So we know Job himself didn't write down, but this was a known occasion that people remembered, and they would tell the story of Job to one another around campfires. Somebody at some point sat down and recorded all this information. It is not I don't think doesn't create any problems for the authority of Scripture, the inspiration of Scripture, or the inerrancy of Scripture if maybe that editor is the one who wrote this particular poem. But I tend to be a romantic. I think Job wrote it. So I think Job wrote it. Why? Because Job's name's on the book. I'm just that simple sometimes. So there you have it. What we do know, though, that this is an interlude. So really, we're shifting gears. There isn't really any um, connection thematically with the prior chapter from Job. In the prior chapter from Job, he was still responding to his friends. I think he called them lots of bad names. And in the next chapter, we're sort of moving into a different direction we're going. So we might call this a bit of an interlude. And so it's a different subject, different style. There's no complaining. There's no whining. There's no, I should have a hearing before God, and Bildad, you're a moron. There's none of that in this chapter. And so for that, so you should enjoy tonight, because it's real positive and uplifting. Next week, we'll get right back to normal Job, and we'll pout in our oats. So the two key verses are Job 28, chapter 12, Job 28, chapter 20. They're almost identical, but they're two verses that tell us what the chapter is about. Job chapter 12, but where shall wisdom be found, and where is the place of understanding? Did I say chapter 12? Right, I meant chapter, but you heard verse. Verse 12. Yeah. Yep. And then verse 20, there you go, Gene. Verse 20, from where then does wisdom come, and where is the place of understanding? And so this chapter is about wisdom, and we are going to see how it relates to Job's pursuit to understand God in relationship with his suffering, but he's not going to reference his suffering in particular. And so he's going to look at just a couple of different ways people try to attain wisdom, and then at the end of the book, at the end of the chapter, I should say, he's going to tell us what wisdom looks like and how it's attained. And that's what the chapter is about. So relatively simple, thankfully, but not simple in terms of application. So let's read. I'm going to read verses 1 through 11. The first part of this is man's ingenuity doesn't find wisdom. Man's ingenuity. So here's what it says. Surely there is a mine for silver and a place for gold that they refine. Iron is taken out of the earth, and copper is smelted from ore. Man puts an end to the darkness and searches out the farthest limit, the ore in gloom and deep darkness. He opens a shaft in a valley away from where anyone lives. They are forgotten by travelers. They hang in the air, far away from mankind. They swing to and fro. As for the earth, out of it comes bread, but underneath it is turned up as by fire. Its stones are the place of sapphires, and it has dust of gold. That path no bird of prey knows, and the falcon's eye has not seen it. The proud beasts have not trodden it. The lion has not passed over it. Man puts his hand to the flinty rock and overturns mountains by the roots. He cuts out channels in the rocks, and his eyes see every precious thing. He dams up the streams so that they do not trickle, and the thing that is hidden he brings out to light. So what he is talking about here is he wants us to understand what, at that point anyway, something incredible that humankind could do. And this is deep mining for precious metals. So in verses 1 and 2, he talks about 4 kinds of precious metals that are brought up out of the earth: silver, gold, iron, and copper. And these metals are obtained by digging in the ground and channeling through rocks and trying to find them. That's the way you get these metals. You have to dig for them. And these metals are, of course, these are precious metals. These are costly. Gold and silver, we understand what those. They're costly because they're used a lot of times for currency and for trading. Of course, we know in Solomon's day, there was so much gold that silver became a little bit of a, oh, you just have silverware? Okay. And then iron, of course, as we understand, is critically important for weaponry. If you could have iron-fitted chariots versus just wooden chariots, that was a big deal, and same with weapons. So all of these metals offered a lot of value, and this is the reason why mining for them is worth the time and effort, because you may have to work extraordinarily hard to obtain gold, but once you have it, what you can get with that gold far exceeds the effort to obtain it. So what he is saying, especially in verse 3, he relates this to the ingenuity of humankind. He says, man puts an end to the darkness. What do you think that means? He turns on a light. So we're smart enough if we dig a long hole to take a candle. That's a good idea. We go into a place that most creatures wouldn't go into because it's too dark. And we not only create the space of darkness, but we take lights in with us. And we illuminate this darkness. We can go into the earth and have the ability to see what is needed to be seen to ore these materials. We search out to the farthest limit this ore in gloom and deep darkness. The deepest mine in the world today is in South Africa, as you would expect. There's a lot of metals mined in South Africa. It's 2.5 miles deep. At least that's the lowest point, because they're following a vein of gold that's about 30 inches wide. It's not very wide, so their mine just continues to follow this vein of gold deeper and deeper. But at this point, the deepest working part of this mine is 2.5 miles deep. If you are going to work a shift and you have to get on the elevator to go down to the bottom to work, it takes an hour for the elevator to get to yeah. So at the bottom of this mine, the surface of the rock walls are 150 degrees. So the heat from the walls is not something you can. So they have to pump. What they do is they pump this slurry of ice water down into the depths of the mine constantly to keep the places where the workers are working at a temperature that they can work. Because the deeper they go, of course, the warmer it's getting. So and again, they're digging gold, and that's a lot of effort, but they're getting enough gold out of this mine that all of this expense, of course, this company is extraordinarily profitable. We won't speak to maybe the labor costs, maybe are relatively low. But this speaks to what Job is getting at. This is what they were doing in Job's day. Certainly not 2.5 miles deep, but during their time, they were digging into the ground, finding gold. There was lots of gold to be had. He talks about these miners in verse 4. Now, again, I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but I play one on TV, or I stayed at a Holiday Inn last night. My understanding is, and I didn't do this, but if you were to look at 4 different English translations of chapter 4, one commentator put it this way, you would wonder if they were looking at the same Hebrew, because this is a notoriously tricky passage to understand. What happens is there's a lot of idioms and colloquialisms or figures of speech that are used that probably made perfect sense 1,000 years before Christ. And nowadays, it may not. You just wonder what they're going to do when they're digging through the ancient ruins of our civilization and they find LOL. They're trying, why are they laughing out loud? Is everything this funny? Why is everything so laugh out loud funny? And so it's the same kind of thing. We're not exactly sure. So well, clearly not for the particular idioms that are used, and that's one of the challenges with Job. There is Hebrew language throughout the book of Job that is very unique to Job, and that's why translation is hard. But the translation isn't problematic, because first of all there's nothing in here theologically troubling. He's illustrating the point. So whatever your translation is, he's making the point. Miner's mine. Yeah, I'm using the ESV. And it makes perfect sense for how a mine works. The mine is where the gold is, not where it's convenient. So it's out in the middle of nowhere, because that's where the mine needs to be. You don't just dig a hole anywhere. You have to dig where the ore is. And then he talks about the nature of the miner hanging in the air. That, Angela is a little bit nervous to take a modern elevator to the bottom of a 2.5 mile deep hole. The elevators of these miners was probably a piece of wood with rope on each end, that you would sit on, and Joshua would lower you down, and you hope he's got a good grip, and you hope that wood is good, and you hope it doesn't spin. So this is he's just talking about what miners do, and the diligence it takes to mine. Further description in verse 5, he talks about bread coming out of the earth, and this figure of speech could be one of 2 things, or maybe a combination of both. Number one, obviously we know grain comes from the earth. You grow grain out of the earth. But also, if you mine gold out of the earth, what can you do? You can buy bread. In fact, you can probably get more bread with gold out of the earth than with your wheat. And so he's saying here, the earth, bread comes out of the earth, but interestingly, sort of as a contrast, in the earth it is fire. And that's I just mentioned that because what I say about that 2.5 miles deep, what's happening down there? It gets hotter and hotter and hotter the deeper you go. What's that? Oh, they call money was referred to as bread. Yeah, that's right. See, there you go. Verse 6, he talks about what they're finding down there. Deep down there, they're finding sapphires and gold, and that's exactly what miners are doing. So this is a long poem about mining. So if your kids or grandkids play Minecraft, you should send them Job 28. Job 28. Job was doing Minecraft before your kids and grandkids were. Now he compares humankind and their ingenuity to a couple of different animals. So falcons, of course, we understand, they're hunt birds of prey. They have fantastic eyesight. Their eyesight is much sharper than humans' eyesight. And so you have a creature that physically has capabilities humans can't have. Their eyesight is far better. And interestingly, he says, humans which have less eyesight are able to see things a falcon cannot. Because a falcon doesn't mind. That doesn't have the intelligence. That doesn't have, a falcon knows how to do one thing. I see mouse, I eat mouse. It's kind of a one track. Now it can see creatures on the ground from high altitude really, really, really well. We can't, but we can see things a falcon can never see because we have the intelligence and being made in the image of God to say, let's dig a hole and see what's underground. And a falcon would never do that. Again, same with the lion, who is considered, an apex predator, was even back then. This is the top of the food chain. And he says, listen, a lion who apparently rules everywhere he goes, he's not in this hole. He would never be in there. Of course, we know a lion was in one hole in the Bible. My favorite story of the Bible is very important. No, Benaiah. Yeah, one of David's mighty men who on a snowy day crawled into a pit and killed a lion. Man, I love that guy. No. And I think he did it on a dare. I think it was, hey, Benaiah, go see if you can kill that lion. You got it. And now we're talking about Benaiah. You know what else he did? I read this verse to my son the other day. He couldn't believe it was in the Bible. And he said, Benaiah conquered a huge Egyptian with only a club. And the Egyptian had a spear. And Benaiah took the spear from the Egyptian and killed him with it. And it's just one little verse about Benaiah. This guy was a tough hombre. Lions didn't scare Benaiah. The Old Testament. Right. Somewhere it is said, as the author of Hebrews says. So the comparison is, if I meet a lion in the jungle, I'm dead. But if it's a mining competition, the lion can't do anything. And so humans, with our ingenuity and our intelligence, are able to do things that even other creatures that we would look at, wow, these are phenomenal creatures. Humans are able to do incredible things. One of the things, we were touring Temple Mount in November, and we went on this tour of the tours of the temple. And one of the things the guide pointed out to us was the stone that they believe is the largest stone in the Temple Mount complex. And we're about 30 feet below ground surface because the foundation of that temple goes very deep. And it's interesting. He said they're still not totally sure how they got this thing here. This is a really big rock. No, this was a carved piece of stone. This was squared off with Roman borders on it, and this thing was, it was massive. And they say they have ideas how they might have done it, but first of all, you would have to get it there. This thing was quarried miles away. And then once you got it there, this wasn't the bottom one. You've got to get it on top of all these other ones. On top of that, this is one thing I didn't know while we were there, is they wanted a certain amount of offset on every course. And they've measured the offset on each course on top of each other, and it's exactly the same. So if I'm moving a 50-ton stone, I'm not too concerned how accurate it is, and they were just dropping. So again, humans can be smart if we need to. And that's what That is what Job is getting at with this first section of the poem. He says, man can do powerfully ingenuitive kinds of things. Last section on human ingenuity is in verse 9. Unlike these animals, the falcon and the lion, man can do these things. He puts his hand to the flinty rock, overturns the mountains. Look how the two lines of each of this section work. He puts his hand to the rock, and what happens? Overturns the mountains. So he's able to do something, and it accomplishes something. He cuts out channels in the rock, and he sees the precious stones. So he dams up the streams, and so he's able to see what's hidden. Why do you need to dam up a stream if you're mining? Yeah, you want to see what's underwater, or you might be using the water to power water-powered machinery. So either way. But you got water. How are we going to see what's under this water? There might be precious stones in this riverbed. Well, I got an idea. Let's stop the river up. Now I know one animal that does that, the beaver, as we know. But here we have humans who are able to discern what ought to be done, come up with a way to do it, and do it, and accomplish something. So just as a quick aside about work and ingenuity, and one of the curses of the fall of man in Genesis is the word toil. So is work a curse? No, work is not a curse. We were created to work. God, before the fall, put us in the garden, have dominion over it, put it in order, improve it, name the animals. These were all fantastic ways. We were designed to work, and we were designed to work. But we were designed to work in such a way that when we did a thing, it did a thing. And so you put your hand to your job, and it goes the way you want it to, and the outcome is what you predicted. That's work. Toil is, I do what I think I ought to do, and it doesn't work, or it works poorly. Does anybody ever experience that? Yeah, with computers. Yeah, they're designed to make us more efficient. Yeah, so that's toil, is when you go to do something and you put your best effort into it, and it still doesn't work. And sometimes we can figure out why that doesn't work, and other times we're not able to figure it out. Sometimes you just say, well, that's the way the world is. Sometimes things don't work. So that's toil. Job here is talking in a real idealized way about the way mankind can work, because you look at how humankind has worked. We've accomplished some stuff. I think it's interesting to read in Genesis about the Tower of Babel, and then to look at Manhattan. And one of the things God sort of said was, these guys can do a lot of incredible things. And I think in a particular point in history in Genesis, it was important to rein that in a bit. But it's clear now that what humankind can accomplish. There's a lot we can accomplish, not because we're something special, it's because we're made in the image of God. We reflect the glory of God. Now, there's also a lot of things we do poorly. So you look at Manhattan, that's pretty incredible. Now, I'm not saying you would want to live there, but it's beautiful from a distance, maybe, Central Park, I don't know. But there's also a high-rise building in San Francisco. Shoot, I think it might be called the Millennium Tower. And they discovered this thing was tilting a little bit, and then tilting a little bit more, and tilting a little bit more, and realized that it wasn't on a real good foundation, and so they were going to need to get underneath this thing and shore it up. But they discovered when they started driving pilings down next to it to get down to bedrock that the action of driving the pilings into the ground made it tip faster, because it had a certain rate. Now, it's not dangerous, and people can live in it, but you just can't put eggs on your counters. Yeah. I mean, they're too expensive. You can't drop an egg nowadays. And so you can say, well, look at these magnificent things we do, but they don't always go right. Here's a several $100 million high-rise, and likely the company that built it is going to go bankrupt. But so this is what, to begin his argument about wisdom, he wants us to look at what humankind is like and say, look, we have ingenuity. Now the question is verse 12. That's one of our key verses. What's it say? But where shall wisdom be found, and where is the place of understanding? So what he's saying here, in spite of all of our brilliance, we will not find wisdom on our own. Wisdom is not found through human ingenuity. So one of the things we can say about wisdom from a biblical standpoint, wisdom, there is a sense of intelligence, understanding, retaining some information. There's a sense of that, but being smart is not the same as being wise. And of course, most of us know that by experience. But Job wants us to know, I don't care how good you are at mining and digging. At their time, this is one of the most complex engineering feats that he could probably use as an example. We might use the example of, manned flight. We might use the example of modern-day computers. We might think of, the Manhattan Project, nuclear energy. These are lots of things we might think are, wow, this is incredible that humankind could pull this off, and that verse 12 would still apply. Where shall wisdom be found? Where is the place of understanding? It's not merely knowledge or concept. So that's one place people try to be wise, is by obtaining as much knowledge and having as much creative ingenuity and being able to solve problems. And those are all good things. They glorify God, but that is not how wisdom is attained according to Job. Does that kind of make sense? You say, well, that was a long poem to make that point. Well, that's what Job does, so that's why it's fun. Plus, I kind of like this poem. I like poems. When was the last time you read a poem about mining? I mean, it just doesn't, maybe some Western poems. I'm not. Okay, let's continue on. His next place that he's going to talk about where people try to get wisdom is through wealth. So let me read verses 13 through 19. Man does not know its worth. There is wisdom. He's talking about wisdom from verse 12. And it is not found in the land of the living. The deep says, it's not in me. And the sea says, it's not with me. It cannot be bought for gold, and silver cannot be weighed as its price. It cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir, in precious onyx, I don't know how you pronounce that, or sapphire. Gold and glass cannot equal it, nor can it be exchanged for jewels of fine gold. No mention shall be made of coral or of crystal. The price of wisdom is above pearls. The topaz of Ethiopia cannot equal it, nor can it be valued in pure gold. So, where is wisdom to be found? First of all, secondly, here he's saying money can't buy wisdom. You can't buy it. You can't be rich enough to be able to make a purchase of wisdom. The first reason is, verses 13 and 14, is that we don't properly value wisdom. That's what he says in verse 13. We don't know its worth. So if wisdom were for sale, we wouldn't know what to pay for it. And if we were going to make an offer, we would undervalue it. We wouldn't want to pay the value of it. So he says there's kind of two problems. Number one is we don't value wisdom the way we ought to value wisdom. And if we did value wisdom that way, we still don't have the means to get it. Our money is not going to be able to buy it. He says it's not in the ocean. It's not in the deep mines. And so where is it going to be found? Verses 15 through 19 we can sort of summarize in this way. There is nothing that can be seen as valuable that would compare with the value of wisdom. And he lists all kinds of treasures, gold, precious stones, all kinds of treasures that people would want. Some of these treasures you would want because they provide security. Some of these treasures would provide income. Some of these treasures would just provide a sense of wealth, And he lists all these treasures, and none of them compare to wisdom. Of course, this reminds us of Solomon, doesn't it? Solomon offered offerings, and then he went up, and I think it was Gibeon, and he offered offerings, and he fell asleep, and he had a vision, and God said, what do you want? And Solomon's answer was, this is a glorious people. Your people are a glorious people, and there's a lot of them. Who can govern them? Who could govern them? And you might wonder, well, why would Solomon think that? And if you remember what King David said before Solomon died and he was making plans for the temple, do you remember what King David said about his son Solomon? he is young and inexperienced. So I've kind of made plans for this project. Wouldn't that be kind of a bummer? King David's not dead yet. You're barely king, and he's telling the whole world you're young and inexperienced. So he was well informed that he had a lot to learn, but he prayed to God that he would have the wisdom to govern, that he would have the wisdom to lead. And in a way, he was praying for wisdom. And so what did God give him as a result? Gave him wisdom as well as wealth, as well as peace from his enemies. And so he, in that sense, what he did is he valued wisdom above those other things. And that's, so he sort of saw that and understood it. And that's what Job is getting at here, is if we could buy wisdom, we would want to bargain for it, get a cheap price for it. But it turns out you can't buy wisdom. So if you can't find wisdom through human ingenuity and you can't buy it, then we get back to the same question. Verse 20, what is it? Yeah, of course, Gene. What's your question? That's good. So let's get to the end, because I'll define wisdom, at least from this poem, when we get towards the end. And if it doesn't answer your question, then reset it. What's the difference between wisdom and intelligence? Right, allegedly. Depends on what you learn. Right. Okay, verse 20 is the question. You can't dig for it. You can't buy it. What's verse 20 says? From where then does wisdom come? Where is the place of understanding? And so again, he's setting up again. He wants us to get to the place of, well, then where do you get it? Or how do you find it? Yeah, and that's exactly right. It's from the Lord. So let me read verses 21 through 28. 21 through 28. God understands the way to it, and he knows its place. For he looks to the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When he gave to the wind its weight and apportioned the waters by measure, when he made a decree for the rain and a way for the lightning of the thunder, then he saw it and declared, he established it and searched it out. He said to man, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to turn away from evil is understanding. So, did I skip verses 21 and 22? What part? Did I start in verse 23? Okay, that's all right. No, I started in 23. Yeah, my first mistake of the day, and it was so late in the day. It's fantastic. Verses 21 and 22. Where is the place of understanding? It is hidden from the eyes of all living and concealed from the birds of the air. Abaddon and Death say, we have heard a rumor of it with our ears. Then we continue on. God understands the way to it, and he knows its place. I'm not going to read it all over again. Does that make more sense? Okay, good. So verses 21 and 22, wisdom can't be seen by any creature. It's hidden away. He talks again about birds. Animals can't see it. Even animals that can see better than humans, they have better eyesight than humans, they can't see it. It's hidden from humankind. It's hidden from all the eyes of the living. And then what about the most powerful thing that maybe humans have to deal with on a daily basis? What about death? Abaddon and death, two different words for death. Maybe they know where wisdom is, because death is a big deal. And what's interesting, it's sort of a personifying Abaddon and death, personifying death. If you could talk to death, you imagine the sickle and the black cloak. Hey, have you heard of wisdom? And what's it say? Death's response. Well, I've heard a rumor of it, but I'm not really sure. I mean, I've heard it's a thing. So here's this powerful thing, death, which no human has been able to conquer other than Christ, and it's like, well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure where wisdom is. So the picture he's trying to paint here is wisdom is not achievable by merely humans, or even something as powerful as death. Verse 23 really is the summary statement. God alone understands the way to wisdom, and then the rest of the poem is intended to answer the question, how is it that God alone has an understanding of wisdom? Why is that? What's going on, and why is God alone able to have access to and understand wisdom? And so then he breaks down his argument. Verse 24, first of all, God made everything, and God sees everything, and he can see and know everything all at once. So everything God has made, he is intimately aware of. Remember, it says that in Matthew. If a sparrow falls to the ground in an unseen forest, God is fully aware of it, so there's nothing going on. I've mentioned this before, but it's worth being reminded. There are creatures we're still discovering God has known about the whole time. You know, the fish at the bottom of the ocean with the bait that hangs off its forehead with the giant teeth, remember from Nemo? He's known about that the whole time. And humans didn't go down there till relatively recently. We didn't know there was things down there. Just certainly nothing could live down there. And God has been aware of all of these things. He's aware of what's going on both on earth and in the heavens. You know, we launch the Webb telescope and throw it a few miles out into space and open the thing up and take a couple of pictures, and we pat ourselves on the back and give ourselves a gold star. And God says, welcome to the party. I've been looking at this forever. This is not new information for me. And so God has made everything, and he sees everything, and he knows everything. He knows everything's place. He knows precisely where all things that he has made are. And so the when of wisdom is established in verses 25 and 26. When did wisdom sort of begin? And he gives us that information. When God gave wind its weight, apportioned the waters, he made a decree for the rain, and a way for the lightning and thunder. First of all, he's describing a storm here. That's important in the context, because how is God going to show up at the end of the book of Job? As a storm. Yeah, he's going to show up in the storm. So this is God saying he created this weather, and it was when God made all of this, when God comes in the storm, verse 27, then he saw it and declared it. The it there is wisdom. So when wisdom occurred, when what? When God talks. If God's talking, wisdom is happening. Yeah, and here he's really describing creation in many ways, but a very limited description of creation, just talking about the storm. So where is wisdom? It's God. God is wisdom, and wisdom that we can perceive is when God is declaring, when God is speaking, when he's talking, making himself known. So wisdom, in many ways, it's not to say wisdom is God, because it's just that God is wisdom. That's his nature. And then when he's speaking, it's always true, it's always wise. And whereas we speak foolishness all the time. It happens all the time. If we're not being foolish, we might be meaningless or trite or condescending. There's lots of ways that we're speaking and we're not wise. When God speaks, it's wise. And that's why, I don't know if you've read through the Gospels recently. I don't know, this is something I know. When Jesus is talking, it sounds different. Now, I know we're reading it in English, maybe it's different in Greek, but I always say it doesn't seem like he's in a bad mood. Occasionally, he seems a little bit wound up, usually when he's dealing with religious people. But I wouldn't call him jovial. Would you? It doesn't, when you read it, it doesn't. I'm not saying he wasn't. There might have been times when he was, walking down the trail and Peter tripped and fell, and Jesus said, wow, I'm surprised you tripped with your foot being in your mouth all the time. Something like that. I don't know. Jesus probably wouldn't say something like that. But so it could very well have been that they would, he interacted in similar ways. But it's interesting when you read how maybe sober is the right word. And maybe matter of fact. Yeah. What's that? Yeah, there's a level of intensity and intentionality. There's not a single word wasted. It's just each word is precisely said. And so I really think you see that wisdom. There's really no wasted words in that sense. So when God is speaking, it is wisdom, because that's his nature. When he's acting wisely. When he's speaking wisdom. It's so God really in the end is the source of wisdom and the place in which it is found. So God is wisdom because he knows everything, because he made everything. And he's also wise because he is powerful. So these are all things of wisdom. Knows everything, sees everything. He is all powerful, and everything he does is right and true. So verse 27 and 28 really establish then, how do we interact with wisdom? How is it possible for us? And that's where he says in verse 28, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to turn from evil is understanding. So if God has wisdom because he is wisdom, because when he speaks he's wise, wisdom is to know God and to know God's ways. Both of those. Not just to know God. There is a God. Lots of people know there's a God. But to know his ways. And not only to know his ways, but to affirm. It's wisdom when we say, I want to know God and his ways and conform myself to his ways. That's wisdom. To say, I've discovered God by his kindness, and I know his ways, and therefore I want to find God by encountering him according to his ways, because his ways are wise. So the first way that the Bible describes that relationship is the fear of the Lord. And here's a way we might describe fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord means a lot of things. So what's the first thing fear of the Lord means? Okay, reverence, that's the second thing. What's the first thing? It's the easy one. To be afraid. So he's big, you're small. When if you were to encounter God in his glory, you would be petrified. Now we don't have to be terrorized of God, but I just don't like to defang the word. He didn't say fear of the Lord because it's warm and fuzzy. He says fear of the Lord because God is big and you are tiny. Yeah, exactly. So fear of the Lord, and then also reverence, respect, deference. These are all ways we want to think about that. But here's a way of understanding it that might be helpful. To relate to God on his terms. To relate to God on his terms. The fancy Bible word we use for that is worship. And if you look at the Old Testament system of worshiping God, a person puts faith in God and receives salvation. They didn't do the law to get saved. They trusted God to get saved. But because they trusted God and were saved, they wanted to worship God in God's ways. And so that means they had to worship God in particular ways. In fact, the ways that he said to worship. So the fear of the Lord is to say, I'm going to encounter God on his terms, not my terms. That's really, and the opposite of worshiping God on his terms is idolatry. Idolatry is creating a God on my terms. And that's what people do all the time. That's maybe the second sin after pride is idolatry, is we want to conform God to our image instead of fear of the Lord, wisdom, conforming me to him. So I worship God on his terms. So the first thing is fear of the Lord. That's what he says in verse, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. That's a recognition I need to relate to the Lord on his terms. So wisdom is the fear of the Lord relating to God on his terms. I want to do just a couple of asides. What are we? Yeah, good. We have time. Is that okay? Because we're going to do it anyway. First thing I wanted to point out was Proverbs 3. I think, Diana, you mentioned Proverbs. I just want to read a little bit of Proverbs 3, and you can turn to it if you want. It is incredible. That's right. And Proverbs 3 is one of those places. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it may lend credence to why some people think that the writing down of the account of Job occurred somewhere during David and Solomon's. It's a guess. I mean, they have but we're not exactly sure when it was written, when it moved from oral tradition into written. Okay, let's look at Proverbs 3. I'm not sure how much of it we're going to read. This is really, really well known. You probably have memorized portions of this. Proverbs 3, beginning in verse 1. My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. Let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. So you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him. He will make your paths straight. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. So don't be wise in your own eyes, but be wise according to God. How are you wise according to God? Worship Him on His terms. He mentions one particular way. What is that? Turn from evil. That's one of the ways we worship God. You say no to sin, and don't do it. I mean, it's just that simple, isn't it? Yeah. We see sin, we don't, and no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say turn from evil. And he's saying this is wisdom, is conforming ourselves to God and worshiping on Him on His terms. He then lists several sort of more practical ways we can worship God. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with your first fruits, then your barns will be full. So that's another way to worship God on His terms. That's drawn right out of the Old Testament law code. That was a normal, expected thing to do, the harvest, the first fruits, and that would be given into the temple as an act of worship. So he's saying worship God on His terms. Don't despise the Lord's discipline. The Lord reproves those He loves. And verse 19, skip down there. This reflects a lot of what we read in Job. The Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding He established the heavens. By His knowledge the deeps broke open, and the clouds drop down the dew. Doesn't that sort of reflect what we read over in Job's poem, where he said wisdom was there when God created the storm? So we see wisdom. When was wisdom? Wherever God is, and we especially see it in creation. So in Proverbs 3, it just confirms again this notion that the fear of the Lord is how we exercise wisdom, and to fear the Lord is to recognize we want to live on His terms and not ours. Why is that difficult to do? Is because we don't see the Lord in our presence. Because, of course, we would behave differently if the Lord was just walking around with us. And so the fear of the Lord is a proposition where by faith we behave based on what is true. God is with us. And we recognize that and say, you know what, since God's with me, I'm going to behave in a manner that is an act of worship to Him. And then somebody asked me this the other day. Well, shouldn't I do that when I want to? I mean, if my heart doesn't really want to obey the Lord, I mean, isn't it sort of hypocrisy to obey Him even if I don't want to? And my answer is two answers. Number one, sin's always dangerous. So good attitude or bad, if you say no, that's a win. So take the win. You know, saying no to sin, even if you want to do it, is good. And second thing, when are you going to stop wanting to sin? It's called your funeral. You know, that's what that's called. So we're going to have to wrestle through it. I pray all the time the things that we're all tempted by, that we would not want those things. But we know that's not the way it works. So sometimes, good attitude or bad, hypocrisy or not, saying no to sin is a really, really, really good idea. I'd almost call it wisdom. Right, yeah. You know, we do this all the time in other relationships. You know, sometimes interacting with our spouse, we do so we're moved of love and benevolence, and other times we do it because we want to stay out of trouble. Right? That's wisdom. I'm trying to help you guys. I'm trying to help you out, Ralph. That's just wisdom right there. So that's, you know, and we do it. So sometimes we should do this in our relationship with God. You know, Lord, you know my heart is, I got a bad attitude, but you know what? I'm going to keep my mouth shut and not say to this person what I want to. Yeah, and I'm just going to do it. You know my heart is as bad as ever, but I'm going to worship you by zipping my lips. And that's wisdom. And I've actually found, of course, I haven't been around as long as some, I actually find that sometimes our heart follows after that. You know, that when we build in some of those habits, pretty soon we have a less of a desire to engage. So I think that's one of the things we should also, right. It gets worse. Yep, it gets, it creates greater and greater desire within us. So, all right. Wisdom is relating to God on His terms, and I want to close with just a couple of passages from the Newer Testament as a way of encouragement to remind us. If wisdom is relating to God on His terms, then we know that what? Jesus is His terms. So if we're going to relate to God, God says, here's how you relate to me. How do we relate to God? Through Jesus. That's the manner in which a wise person relates to God. James 1:5, a real famous verse. I'm going to read it, otherwise I'll quote it wrong. If anyone lacks wisdom, he was being nice there. Since you lack wisdom would be the right way to write that, but he was being nice. James, for the most part, isn't nice, but here's one of the spots where he's being polite. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. And then it's so interesting because James is one of the most practical letters in the New Testament. If you want to look at a bunch of things that really help you follow closely after God and worship on his terms, it's James. I mean, look at chapter 3. What is more powerful than the tongue? We can bit horses, we can control ships with a rudder, and the tongue, it's a flaming evil, lit on fire by the flames of hell, I think. Isn't that a verse? Yeah, something like that. Who can contain it? And so that's very practical. That's very helpful. What's a wise person do? Zip your lip. Hey, we're back on that topic again. Learn to control the tongue. And the first step is saying, I can't, so seek the Lord's help through the power of the Spirit. So James is saying, seek wisdom. How do you seek wisdom? Worship God on his terms. Don't show favoritism in the body of believers. Recognize that faith without works is dead. If you can claim Christ all day long, if you are just the same as you were before you got saved, there's a problem. You need to think about it. You need to just pay attention to the fruit in your life. So the gospel is Jesus being the ways in which we engage with God in worship. One other passage is really famous, so we'll read it, 1 Corinthians 1:18-25. So I'm going to read this, and we're going to close. And then we have to ask Gene if we answered a question. 1 Corinthians 1:18-25. I'll try to actually start reading at the verse I said I'm going to start reading at. Go all the way to 27. Well, I'm going to check and see what you've got for me. I'll go all the way. I'll trust you. Okay, we'll go all the way to 27. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing. Folly, of course, is the opposite of wisdom. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For since in the wisdom of God the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. Jews demand a sign, Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to the Jews and folly to the Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God, for the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. And by special request, we're continuing on to verse 27. For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish. You guys, that's kind of what he's saying there under his breath. God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. So here we have God's wisdom. God's wisdom is Christ crucified. This is the wisdom of God. Christ crucified. Now, the Jews want a different kind of wisdom. We saw that. Show us a sign. If you can save yourself, come off the cross. We'll believe you and make you our king. Whereas the Greeks want wisdom. They want knowledge. And you can look at Acts chapter 17 and Paul's visit to the Areopagus and debating with them about the gods of their age. And then God said, here's wisdom. Anyone who believes can have God. And the terms of the relationship is trust Jesus for forgiveness of sin. That's wisdom. That's wisdom. And you say, well, that seems silly. That seems simple. And that's exactly what it is. Fools like us get it, right? And then the wisdom of the world misses it because the wisdom of the world wants something different, something more spectacular, something more powerful. Okay, before I list my 3 applications, Gene, did we answer your question, the difference between intelligence and wisdom? Right? Right. Yeah, biblical wisdom does require some knowledge. I don't know if we'd call it intelligence, but information. It requires a knowledge of Christ, you know, and a recognition he is God. And so it does require, it doesn't mean, you've heard this famous quote, it's a terrible quote, but it says, you know, everyone should share the gospel and when necessary use words. Have you heard this phrase? I read a great reworking of that. It said everybody should feed the hungry and when necessary use food. That doesn't make any sense. In order to share the gospel, you have to use words. Like, you're a sinner, Jesus died for sinners, you have to believe. And now we portray the gospel through our deeds. You know, the gospel ought to be seen working through us and how we treat others and people in our community. So, Gene, what I would say, you do have to, to respond in faith, the gospel is a proposition. We have to say, Jesus is God, I trust him for forgiveness of sin. But intelligence, do you have to be smart to believe the gospel? And the answer is no. Yeah, now smart people can, but also those who have less capacity intellectually can. And so it's not devoid of information, but it's not necessarily, wisdom is not merely the ability to retain lots of information or to be able to analyze lots of information. I would say that, and I think that's I think that's right. The application from our passage would be the manner in which in a particular circumstance, whatever's going on in my life, what is the way that I relate to God in this circumstance on his terms in this circumstance? So, and the reason that's important is because our natural tendency as wanting to be our own God is to figure out ways. Wisdom is God just happens to want things the way I want them. You see what I'm saying? That's just sort of course, maybe it's just me, and then it's going to be awkward. But so I've got an idea. God really wants things this way, and it just so happens then I can make this other person do what I want. And wisdom is looking at a situation and saying, what is worshiping God on his terms mean? That means it may be something I desire, but also it might mean self-sacrifice. It might mean humiliation or humility. So it's always, wisdom I think is always going to be referenced on the person of God, not on our personal circumstances. It's going to be referenced, what is God sort of intending in this? Of course, life is very, very complicated, so sometimes it's hard to figure out, and we have to use our best judgment. Okay, very good. 3 applications. You want those? Job wants to stand before God and have a hearing. Do you remember all that? And he wants to know why suffering is happening. And what I wanted to point out from this passage here, this is a bit of a mixture of wisdom and foolishness. It's kind of a little bit of both. It's foolish because Job should understand God's ways are God's ways. Job, don't worry, God's going to tell him that very clearly when we get to the end of the book. Gird yourself like a man. I've got something to explain to you. My ways are my ways. You don't understand them. But Job is also wise because in his suffering, he wants to relate to God. That's what he wants. Remember, that's his main desire. We've talked about this numerous times. His desire in his suffering is to have relational connection with God, and he doesn't know what's going on. And he's trying to figure out what does it mean to worship God on his terms. He can't figure that out. That's very, very wise. Even though it's coming off as sometimes angry and frustrated, and so in one sense he's foolish to think he can understand God's ways, but on the other hand, really, really important that he's continuing to pursue the Lord through his suffering. I want to relate to God. I want to know why his terms of engagement with me right now involve suffering. I don't understand it, and I want to know what that's about. And I think that's fantastic. That's wise. Why is God doing this? He doesn't always tell us. He oftentimes doesn't tell us. But that desire to want to relate to God is really wise. The foolish part is to think we can try to convince God that our ways are better than him. That's where Job gets a little sideways. I also thought it was important to note that in someone like Job, there's some elements that are really, really good and some elements where he's really, really struggling. And I like that because I think that's the Christian life. There's sometimes, man, this is great. While at the same time, there's other things that aren't going so great. That's kind of normal. Okay, let's talk about Job's friends. They're just fools. There's nothing that they have to say that's terribly wise. And the reason is because they want Job to relate to God in a way that God did not want him to. They want Job to earn God's favor through righteous deeds. And what has God already described Job as? He's already blameless. So they want Job, they're trying to convince Job to relate to God in a way that isn't appropriate. And so they're fools. So anybody who wants to tell somebody you have to relate to God in this way, if that isn't God's way, you're being a fool. And that's what Jesus was dealing with Pharisees constantly, just fools. That were telling people how to relate to God, and they weren't telling people God's way to relate to God. They wanted Job to relate to God merely through external behavior. Now, we do relate to God with external behavior, but it begins in our heart. And so that's where that comes from. No, it doesn't. Exactly right. No merit there. Okay, last thing, and I'm not sure if this means anything to you, but in terms of suffering, I think it's important to note when we understand God's wisdom and his view on creation, he is not oblivious to any element of it. So in terms of suffering, from his vantage point, he knows precisely the level of suffering. He knows every ounce of it. He knows exactly what it's like. He can see all of what it's like to endure it, and he also knows all of the ends. So he knows where it's going. And he always is working, very knowledgeable of our personal situations, knowing where it's going. What we can understand is God is always working out of his wisdom. He's never working out of foolishness. Always working out of wisdom. So even the parts of our life that are difficult, and there are many, many parts of life that can be very, very difficult, those are, number one, known by God. To me, that's really important, not oblivious. Secondly, he knows where the end is going. Now, sometimes we would also like to know where the end is going, I think. Is that, Lord, where are we going with this? And I think there's two elements to that. Number one, there's something fundamental we learn about trusting God by not knowing where he's going with it. It's a pain, but I think there's an element of that. But another part of understanding is if God told us what he was up to, probably where we are today, we wouldn't be okay with it. We'd say, God said, well, here, I'm going to do this so that we can get to here. We would say, terrible plan. That's a terrible idea. I've got idea, comfort and ease, and we still get there. And of course, that doesn't accomplish the same thing. So I think this just I could be wrong, so I'm okay with you argue with me on that. I think one of the reasons he keeps us in the dark is we wouldn't be okay with where he's heading with it. Is we'd say, no, there's got to be a better way to get there from here. Yeah, you wouldn't want to know. Do the big fish? I don't know. I have a little bit of claustrophobia, and that whole 3 days, because anytime you see a movie depicting it, he's in this cavernous stomach. But I've opened plenty of fish stomachs. They're not cavernous. They're tight around the food. You just got gookies. It's just gross, and you can't. Anyway, why'd you get me onto that, Kevin? See, you read Jonah enough, you think about these things. Okay, any other comments or questions before we wrap it up? See, that's a good one. To pay the temple tax? Yeah, or to buy a car. Yeah. Peter, go fishing. Yeah, I think that's a part of it. I think an important part of it is recognizing he knows where we're at. I might suggest he knows our suffering more deeply than we do. But also I might suggest, the difficulty is the difficulty is this in terms of him carrying our burden. So I don't know. A lot of us have dealt with pain, and so you take a pain pill, and sometimes my back hurts a little bit because I was dumb when I was young, and but pain doesn't always go away, just gets a little bit less. And so when the ibuprofen hits, okay, that's a little, I can move a little bit better. But then after about a half an hour, now it just hurts. Now, what I've forgotten is it hurts less, right? But in about 6 hours, here we go. Okay, now I remember what it was like. So when God carries our burdens, I think we have to recognize he is always helping us. He is always, we wouldn't have made it this far, and we wouldn't even made it close to this far if he hadn't have carried us along. And I think that's what happens. The amount of difficulty he has left is still enough that it feels like we're carrying it all. But if he were to ever just walk away, we'd be crushed. That's that old, remember that old poem, Footprints in the Sand? There was one set of footprints. And I don't relate with that one at all. I think it ought to be rewritten. For me, it would be one set of footprints, and then on the other side, what sand looks like when you're dragged kicking and screaming. Because that's how most of it, that's what my life would look like. Him just dragging me. If left to my own devices, who knows? I always say I'd be living under a bridge somewhere, and it's just God. So I don't know if that helps, Kevin. He does carry our burdens, but sometimes we don't sense it because he's left some on us. But if he were to ever just walk away, we're done. We would just, you know what I mean? Yeah. Right. I totally agree, Ralph. I don't like that saying at all. I've reworked it for my own experience. God not only doesn't only give us what we can handle, he only gives us what we can handle. Because he knows the best place for his people to be is dependent. And so he puts us in positions where we have to trust him. If we could handle it, we wouldn't have to trust him. That's what Israel wanted in the wilderness, and they couldn't get it. So really good point. Okay, let me close in prayer. God, we thank you for your goodness. We thank you for your wisdom. Father, we pray as James, by your Holy Spirit, instructed us that you would give us wisdom, that we would see the ways in which we need to make adjustments in our life by the power of your Spirit to relate and know you on your terms. And we pray, God, we would take great joy in walking with you because you tell us in Proverbs that when we walk with you and fear you by relating to you on your terms, that you make our paths straight, that you line out the future for us according to your will. And so, God, we pray we would experience your wisdom. And we thank you, God, for how much you love us and that you are coming soon. We do pray for Don and his friends and his family and his coworkers, and then we pray for Mark and Travis on Monday that as we have his service that you would be glorified and the gospel would be heard and believed. In Jesus' name, amen. Good to see you. See you next week.